Who hurt you? The Sicilian Mafia boss asked, his voice quiet but chilling. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Dante Salvatore sat across from me, his gray eyes cutting through my silence. The police had asked me to sketch the suspect's face, and it was him. You're shaking, he murmured, leaning close to my ear. Not because of fear, because you remember me. My hand trembled around the pencil. The officers laughed. A mute witness? Seriously. He turned his head slightly and said one word, names. A gunshot echoed. The laughter stopped. He stood, calmly adjusting his cufflinks. No one mocks my witness. I stared at the spreading pool of blood and realized he wasn't just a criminal. He was a twisted kind of justice made just for me. I am Lena Moretti, the woman who doesn't speak, and he is the man who avenged me. I sat there, pencil still in my hand, the sketch half finished on the table. The police station smelled like burnt coffee and old linoleum, the kind of place that makes you feel small even when you're trying to do something right. My fingers were smudged with charcoal, and I could feel the sweat on my palms making the pencil slip. The officers were still chuckling, their voices sharp, like they were poking at me just to see if I'd flinch. I didn't. I just kept my eyes on the paper, on the lines of Dante's face taking shape. His sharp jaw, the scar above his left eyebrow, the way his lips curved like he knew something the rest of the world didn't. I wasn't shaking because of the cops. I was shaking because of him. Because of that night, years ago, when the world exploded in fire and screams, and I lost my voice. I didn't know why his face felt like a memory I couldn't touch, but it did. Like a song you can hum but can't name. The officer who'd laughed the loudest leaned over, his breath sour with cigarette smoke. What's the matter, sweetheart? Cat got your tongue? I tightened my grip on the pencil, the wood digging into my skin, and kept drawing. The next morning, I found a note slipped under my apartment door, written in sharp, elegant handwriting. It said, "Meet me at St. Agnes Church, midnight. Come alone." No signature, but I knew it was Dante. My stomach twisted as I folded the paper, tucking it into my pocket. I spent the day sketching, trying to distract myself, but my hands kept drawing him, his eyes, his scar, the way his presence filled a room without effort. When midnight came, I walked to the church, the streets empty except for the hum of distant traffic. Inside, it was dark, the air thick with the scent of candle wax and old wood. Dante was there, kneeling in a pew, his head bowed like he was praying. I stood at the back, my boots silent on the stone floor, watching him. He didn't turn, but he knew I was there. "You draw me like you're trying to confess something," he said, his voice echoing softly. I clutched my sketch pad, my heart racing. He stood, his silhouette sharp against the flickering candles, and walked toward me. "Show me what you can't say." I opened my pad, my hands trembling, and showed him a sketch. Not of him, but of the fire, the flames curling around a child's small hand. His breath caught, and for a moment, he wasn't the mafia boss. He was just a man, staring at a memory he'd lost. "Hey, before I go on, can I ask you something? If this story's hitting you, if you've ever felt like the world's laughing at you for no reason, just open your phone real quick. Like this video, drop a comment below, and hit that subscribe button. It means a lot to me to know you're out there, listening to my story. It's just a small way to connect, you know? To feel like I'm not alone in this. All right, let me keep going." The interrogation room door slammed shut behind Dante as he left, and the air felt heavier, like he'd taken half the oxygen with him. The cops started whispering, their bravado gone, replaced by nervous glances. I heard one of them mutter, "Salvatore's got eyes everywhere." I didn't care about their fear. I cared about the sketch in front of me, the one they'd hired me to draw because I was the best forensic artist they had, even if they didn't respect me. My hands moved fast, filling in the details, his high cheekbones, the faint lines around his eyes that made him look tired, like he carried too much. I'd always been good at faces, even before the explosion that took my voice. Back when I was just a girl with a sketch pad, dreaming of painting portraits that'd hang in galleries. Now, I drew criminals for cops who mocked me. But that day, something shifted. Dante's words, "Who hurt you?" kept looping in my head like a needle stuck on a record. I didn't know him, not really, but his voice felt like it was pulling at a thread inside me, unraveling something I'd buried deep. By the time I finished the sketch, my hands were steady, but my heart wasn't. A week later, I found out my police records were gone. Not just my work files, my entire history. My name, my address, the reports I'd filed after the explosion that changed my life. Erased, like I'd never existed. I stood in the precinct's records room, staring at an empty folder with my name on it, my stomach twisting. The clerk shrugged, barely looking up from his phone. System glitch, probably. Happens sometimes. But I knew better. This wasn't a glitch. Someone had reached into my life and wiped it clean. I clutched my bag, the strap cutting into my shoulder, and walked out into the rain. The city was gray, the kind of gray that makes you feel like you're drowning in concrete. I kept my head down, my scarf pulled tight, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. That night, I locked my apartment door, checked it twice, and sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea I didn't drink. My sketch pad was open, and without thinking, I started drawing him again. Dante's face. Not the suspect sketch, but something else. Softer, younger, like I was pulling a memory from the fog. I was in a diner the next day, sketching in a booth, when a man slid into the seat across from me. He was lean, with a crooked smile and eyes that didn't match it, cold, like a snake's. He introduced himself as Gabriel Kane, said he worked for mutual friends. My pencil stopped moving. I knew that name. Gabriel was the one who'd pulled me from the fire all those years ago, his hands rough but steady as he carried me out of the burning building. Now he was here, his fingers drumming on the table, watching me like I was a puzzle he couldn't solve. "You're still drawing, huh?" he said, glancing at my sketch pad. "Still quiet, too." I didn't write anything, just stared at him, my heart pounding. He leaned closer, his voice low. "Dante's not who you think he is, Lena. He's why you're in this mess." I pushed my sketch pad away, my hands steady now, and met his gaze. He smirked, but it faltered when I didn't look away. "You're tougher than you look," he said, standing up, "but you're playing with fire again." He left a folded dollar bill on the table, and when I opened it, there was a phone number scrawled inside. I tore it up, but the pieces stayed in my pocket all day. I didn't expect him to show up at my studio. It was late, the kind of late where the city feels too quiet, like it's holding its breath. I was alone, surrounded by my sketches. Dozens of them, pinned to the walls, all of him. I didn't even realize I'd been drawing Dante over and over until he stepped inside, his coat dusted with rain, his eyes scanning the room like he was counting every stroke of my pencil. I froze, my charcoal stick hovering over the paper. He didn't say anything at first, just walked slowly, his shoes clicking on the hardwood floor. He stopped in front of one sketch, the one I'd done of a little boy, maybe 5 years old, with his eyes, Dante's eyes. "You saw something that night?" he said, his voice so low it was almost a whisper. I didn't move. My throat tightened, the way it always did when I thought about the fire, the explosion that took my voice, the screams, the heat. I remembered a child, small and terrified, clutching my hand as I pulled him from the flames. I didn't know whose kid he was, only that I couldn't let him die. Dante turned to me, his face unreadable. "You saved my son." My hands started shaking again, the charcoal slipping from my fingers. I wanted to ask how he knew, how he found me, but my voice was gone, locked away in that burning night. Instead, I grabbed my sketch pad and wrote, "How do you know?" He didn't answer right away. He just looked at me like he was seeing through every wall I'd built. "You draw what you can't say," he said finally, "and you've been drawing me for years." I felt my face flush, like I'd been caught stealing. He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something sharp, like cedar, and smoke. "You're not just a witness, Lena. You're a memory I can't erase." I didn't know what he meant, but his words felt like a weight, pressing down on me, pulling me back to that night when the world burned and a little boy's hand was the only thing keeping me alive. I wrote one word, Why? He didn't answer. He just touched the sketch of the boy, his fingers lingering, and left. A few nights later, I was sketching in my studio when the door burst open and 2 of Dante's men stormed in. They didn't say a word, just grabbed my arms and dragged me out into the cold. My sketchpad fell to the floor, pages scattering like leaves. They shoved me into a car, the leather seats smelling of cigarette smoke and money. We drove to a rooftop, the city sprawling below, lights flickering like they were mocking me. Marco Vitale was there, his suit pristine, his smile sharp enough to cut. He held up a photograph, old and creased, of a young girl with a paintbrush, standing in front of a canvas. Me, before the fire. "You used to be somebody," he said, his voice dripping with pity. "Now you're just a ghost who draws for us." I stood still, my hands clenched, the wind biting at my face. He tore the photo in half, letting the pieces flutter over the edge. "Sign this," he said, shoving a document at me, a contract tying me to Dante's empire, making me their tool. I didn't move. One of the men grabbed my wrist, forcing the pen into my hand, but I dropped it, letting it roll across the roof. Marco's smile vanished. "You'll regret that," he said, and walked away, leaving me shivering under the stars. The next time I saw Dante, it wasn't on my terms. His men came for me in the middle of the night, their faces hard, their hands rough, as they pulled me from my apartment. I didn't scream. I couldn't. But my heart was pounding so hard I thought it'd break my ribs. They drove me to a warehouse, the kind of place that smells like rust and fear. Inside, Dante was waiting, sitting at a table with a single light bulb swinging above him. Marco Vitale, his lawyer, stood nearby, all polished suits and fake smiles. I'd seen him before, on the news, spinning lies for Dante's empire. Now he was holding a tablet, playing a video that made my stomach drop. It was me. Or someone who looked like me, leaking police files to a man in a mask. A fake. A setup. Marco's voice was smooth, like he was selling me something. "Sign this confession, Lena. Admit you betrayed us. It's easier that way." I shook my head, my hands cuffed behind me, the metal biting into my wrists. Dante's eyes were cold, like he didn't know me. "I don't hurt women," he said, "but lies hurt me." I grabbed a pen from the table, my hands shaking so bad I could barely write. "You don't want my truth." That's what I scrawled, the words jagged on the paper. Dante's jaw tightened, and he slammed his hand on the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. I flinched, the memory of that explosion flooding back. The heat, the screams, the way my voice burned away. "Then show me," he said, grabbing my face, his fingers firm but not cruel. He shoved a sketchpad in front of me. "Draw the truth." My hands were trembling, but I started drawing, the lines coming fast, like they were pulling themselves out of me. The warehouse, the fire, the man who said it. Not Dante. Someone else. I could feel Marco watching, his smile fading as the sketch took shape. When I finished, I pushed the pad toward Dante. He stared at it, his face still, like he was seeing a ghost. The drawing wasn't just a scene, it was a memory. One I'd buried so deep I didn't know it was there until the pencil brought it back. A man in a suit, lighting a fuse, his face half hidden in the shadows. Marco. I saw it now, clear as day. The way he'd stood there, watching the flames, while I dragged that little boy to safety. Dante's eyes flicked to Marco and the room went quiet. Marco laughed, but it was nervous, like he knew he'd been caught. "I didn't kill anyone," he said, his voice too smooth. "I staged it, but she knows too much." I looked at Dante, my eyes begging for something. Help, trust, anything. He didn't say a word. He just grabbed my arm, pulling me out of the chair, out of the warehouse, as gunfire erupted behind us. Bullets pinged off metal, and I ducked, my heart racing, but Dante's hand was steady, shielding me. "You don't have to speak," he said, his voice low over the chaos. "I hear you." We ended up in a safe house, some run-down apartment with peeling wallpaper and a single couch that smelled like mildew. Dante locked the door, checked the windows, then sat across from me, his shirt stained with sweat and blood. Not his blood. Someone else's. I didn't ask. I just sat there, my hands still shaking. The memory of that gunfire pulling me back to the explosion, to the night I lost everything. He watched me, his eyes softer now, like he was trying to figure out what I was made of. "You're not weak," he said, like it was a fact, not a compliment. I wrote, "You don't know me." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, and said, "I know you saved my son. That's enough." I didn't know what to do with that. No one had ever looked at me like I was enough. Not the cops, not my family, not the world that saw a mute girl and decided I was broken. I looked away, my fingers tracing the edge of my scarf, the one I'd worn since the fire, the one that hid the scars on my neck. The safe house wasn't safe for long. Late that night, I woke to the sound of glass breaking, my heart leaping into my throat. Dante was already up, a gun in his hand, his eyes scanning the dark. "Stay low," he whispered, pulling me behind the couch. Footsteps echoed outside, heavy and deliberate. I pressed myself against the wall, my breath shallow, the old fear of gunfire clawing at my chest. A man burst through the door, his face hidden by a hood, a knife glinting in his hand. Dante moved fast, disarming him with a single twist, but not before the man's blade grazed my arm, a sharp sting that made me gasp. Blood dripped onto the floor, and I pressed my hand to the wound, my scarf slipping to reveal the scars on my neck. The man froze, staring at them, then at me. "You're her," he said, his voice shaking. "The girl from the fire." Dante knocked him out cold, but the words hung in the air. I looked at Dante, my eyes wide, searching for answers. He didn't meet my gaze, just tied the man's hands and said, "We need to move." My arm throbbed, but I followed him, the weight of that stranger's words heavier than the pain. Things got worse after that. Marco wasn't just a traitor. He was a snake, slithering through Dante's world, spreading poison. Rumors started circling, whispers that Dante was losing control, that he was soft for me. "The boss is sleeping with the mute witness," they said, like I was some kind of trophy. I heard it everywhere. On the streets, in the papers, even in the way people looked at me when I went to buy groceries. One night, Dante's men dragged me to a meeting, some smoky room filled with mafia bosses, their eyes like knives. They sat around a long table, gold rings glinting, cigars burning. One of them, a guy with a face like a bulldog, leaned forward and sneered. "What did he pay you with, sweetheart? A new voice?" The others laughed, their voices loud, ugly. I felt my face burn, but I didn't flinch. I grabbed a napkin from the table and wrote, "He never bought me. He broke me." The laughter got louder, like I'd told a joke. Dante was there, standing in the corner, his glass of whiskey trembling in his hand. Then it shattered, glass and liquor spilling across the floor. The room went quiet. He didn't say a word, but his silence was louder than their laughter. The next day, I found a package outside my studio, wrapped in plain brown paper. Inside was a locket, old and tarnished, with a tiny photo of a boy, Dante's son, the one I'd saved. My hands shook as I held it, the metal cold against my skin. There was no note, but I knew it was from him. I sat on the floor, the locket in my lap, and remembered that night, the heat, the smoke, the way the boy's small hand clung to mine. I'd been so scared, but I couldn't let him go. Now that moment felt like a chain, tying me to Dante in a way I didn't understand. I slipped the locket around my neck, the weight of it heavy against my chest. When I went to the precinct later, the cops stared, their whispers sharp. "She's wearing his mark now," one of them said, loud enough for me to hear. I didn't look at them. I just kept walking, my fingers brushing the locket, feeling its edges dig into my skin like a promise I hadn't agreed to. I thought that was the worst of it, but I was wrong. Marco wasn't done. He kidnapped me, dragged me to some abandoned factory where the air smelled like oil and decay. My hands were tied, my scarf ripped off, exposing the scars I'd hidden for years. He stood over me, his polished shoes clicking on the concrete, and said, "You're a problem, Lena, a mute girl who sees too much." I could hear gunfire in the distance, the sound pulling me back to that night, the explosion, the child's screams. My chest tightened, my breath shallow, like I was drowning in smoke again. Marco tossed a gun at my feet, daring me to pick it up. "Go on," he said, Speak with that. I didn't think. I just grabbed it, my hands shaking so bad I could barely hold it. The shot was loud, louder than anything I'd ever heard, and Marco fell, blood pooling around him. I dropped the gun, my whole body trembling, the world spinning. I hadn't fired a gun since that night, since the explosion that took my voice. When Dante found me, I was still holding the gun, my hands slick with sweat. He knelt in front of me, his voice soft. "Who hurt you?" I wrote, my hand shaking. "You did. When you made me remember." He didn't say anything after that. He just took the gun, wiped it clean, and pulled me to my feet. We drove in silence, the city blurring past, until we stopped at a pier, the ocean stretching out like a dark mirror. Dante stood at the edge, his back to me, the wind tugging at his coat. I stayed in the car, my hands still trembling, the locket heavy around my neck. He turned, holding a small key, and tossed it into the water. "That was the key to Marco's safe," he said, his voice flat. "Everything he had on you is gone now." I didn't move, just watched the ripples spread across the water, my heart pounding. He walked back to the car, his eyes meeting mine for a moment, and I saw something new in them. Guilt, maybe? Or something heavier. I wrote, "Why are you doing this?" He didn't answer, just started the car and drove. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was full of things neither of us could say. But the world didn't stop. The rumors grew louder, uglier. I was walking home one night when a group of reporters cornered me outside my building, their cameras flashing like gunfire. "Is it true you killed Marco Vitale?" one of them shouted, shoving a microphone in my face. "Are you Dante's mistress?" another yelled. I froze, my bag slipping from my shoulder, the locket burning against my skin. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. A woman in a red coat pushed through the crowd, her perfume sharp and expensive. "Leave her alone," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. The reporters backed off, but she didn't look at me with kindness. Her eyes were cold, like she was measuring me. "You're not worth his empire," she said, low enough that only I could hear. I didn't know who she was, but her words stuck, like a splinter under my skin. I walked away, my head down, the cameras still clicking behind me. He didn't say anything after that. He just took the gun, wiped it clean, and pulled me to my feet. We didn't talk about Marco, about the blood, about what I'd done. But the rumors spread like wildfire. "Lena the mute murderer," they called me. The papers ate it up, painting me as some power-hungry traitor who'd killed to climb the mafia ranks. I couldn't defend myself, not in a way they'd hear. The Mafia Council called a meeting and I was dragged in front of them again, my wrists chained, my heart pounding. They wanted blood. Mine. Dante stood there, his face unreadable, holding a gun. "Shoot me," he said, his voice steady. "Or I'll have to shoot you." I didn't move. I couldn't. My eyes burned, tears falling silently as I pressed my hand to his chest, feeling his heartbeat under my palm. He raised the gun and I braced myself, but the shot didn't hit me. It hit his arm, blood soaking his sleeve. He didn't flinch, just looked at me like I was the only thing in the room. "You're not a traitor," he said. "You're mine." I was still shaking when they took me to a cell, the kind of place that smells like damp concrete and despair. The guards didn't look at me, just locked the door and left. I sat on the cot, my hands clasped tight, the locket pressing against my chest. Hours passed, maybe days. I lost track. Then a guard slid a tray of food through the slot and, with it, a folded piece of paper. I opened it, my hands trembling. It was a sketch. One of mine, of Dante's son, but someone had drawn over it in red ink. A circle around the boy's face, a knife slashing through it. My breath caught, and I tore the paper to pieces, my hands shaking so hard I could barely hold them. I didn't know who sent it, but it felt like a warning, like the world was closing in. I tucked the locket under my shirt, hiding it from whoever was watching. When the guard came back, I stared at him, my eyes steady, and he looked away, like he knew he'd crossed a line. Then she came back. Isabel Rossi, Dante's ex-wife, the woman everyone thought died in that explosion years ago. She walked into the room like a ghost, her red dress clinging to her like blood. Her eyes were cold, her smile sharp. "He'll destroy you," she said to me, Like he destroyed me. I didn't know what she meant, but I could feel the weight of her words like they were pulling me under. Dante's face changed when he saw her, like he was seeing a nightmare come to life. She laughed, a sound that cut through the room, and said, "You didn't know, did you? Lena was the girl I pulled from the fire, the one you forgot." My knees buckled. I remembered her now, the woman who'd grabbed me, dragged me from the flames, her face streaked with ash. I'd been a kid, an orphan, caught in a war I didn't understand. Isabel raised a gun, pointing it at me, but Dante stepped in front, his body shielding mine. The shot rang out and blood splattered across my dress. He fell, his breath ragged, his eyes still locked on mine. I stood by his hospital bed, my hands clenched, watching the machines beep, their rhythm steady but cold. The room smelled of antiseptic, sharp and sterile, cutting through the haze of my thoughts. A nurse tried to shoo me out, saying I wasn't family, but I didn't move. I just stared at Dante, his face pale, his chest rising and falling too slowly. A man in a suit came in, one of Dante's men, his eyes red like he'd been crying. He handed me a small box, no bigger than my palm, and said, "He wanted you to have this." Inside was a ring, simple, with a single ruby that caught the light like blood. I didn't put it on. I just held it, my fingers tracing its edges, feeling the weight of what it meant. The man didn't say anything else, just nodded and left. I looked at Dante, my throat tight, and slipped the ring into my pocket. It wasn't a promise, it was a debt, one I didn't know how to repay. Dante didn't die that day, but he was fading. They took him to a hospital, and I was left alone, the world screaming my name. "The mute witch who killed her boss," the headlines said. They blamed me for everything: Marco's death, Dante's empire crumbling, the chaos in the streets. I was dragged into court, my hands shaking as I stood in front of a jury that didn't care. They laughed when I wrote Dante's name on a piece of paper, my only defense. "Love isn't evidence," one of them said, his voice dripping with contempt. I didn't cry, I just looked at them, my eyes burning, willing them to see me. Not the mute girl, not the traitor, but me. Lena Moretti. The girl who'd survived fire, who'd saved a child, who'd loved a man who was both monster and savior. They didn't see me. They never would. But I stood there, silent, my truth heavier than their words. The night before the trial ended, I was alone in my cell when a priest came to visit, his robes heavy with the scent of incense. He sat across from me, his hands folded, and said, "Confess, child, it'll ease your soul." I didn't move, just stared at him, my hands steady on the table. He slid a Bible toward me, but I pushed it back, my fingers brushing the locket instead. His eyes narrowed, like he saw something he didn't expect. "You're not afraid," he said, almost to himself. I wrote, "I'm not guilty." He smiled, but it wasn't kind, it was the smile of someone who'd already judged me. "The world doesn't care about your truth," he said, standing to leave. "It cares about your silence." The door clanged shut behind him, and I sat there, the locket warm against my skin, feeling the weight of every word I couldn't say. Dante's funeral was quiet, just a handful of people in a cold cemetery, the sky heavy with rain. I stood by his grave, my sketchpad in my hands, the last portrait I had ever drawn of him. It was him smiling, the way I imagined he might have before the world made him hard. I signed it in blood, my own, a cut on my finger that stung but felt right. When they unveiled the painting at the gallery, people gasped. It wasn't just a portrait, it was a map, hidden in the lines of his face, exposing Isabel's entire operation, every deal, every name, every secret. The police moved fast, cracking the case, proving Dante's innocence. I wasn't there when they arrested her. I didn't need to be. I was sitting in my studio, alone, when a man walked in. He looked like Dante, same jaw, same presence, but his eyes were different, softer. "He died for you," he said. "I'll live for you." I smiled, and for the first time in 5 years I whispered, "Who hurt you?" We both know the answer. You've been there, haven't you? Felt invisible. Like the world decided you were nothing before you even got a chance to speak. But you're not nothing. You're the fire that doesn't go out, the the strength that doesn't break. You're the silence that screams. I see you, and I'm here, still standing, because of you. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below, and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally, healing.